Greetings and konnichiwa, and welcome to the Onyx Tavern. I'm your host, Rick the Barkeep, bringing you podcast 103 here at the Tavern, presented by Hirotaku.com. Well, patrons of the Tavern, once again I have a great surprise for you. We have a special guest, and we're going to put emphasis on the special, and that is Raptor. Raptor, how you doing, bud?
Doing wonderful, Barkeep. How have you been doing?
Things could be better and all that. You know why. Don't tell the audience why, of course, but,
no, they'll find out in due time.
They will, of course, but it's been a little stressful here, but I'm really glad we were able to get together. I know our schedules are both hectic at the moment, but I think we have a significant topic to talk about tonight. Something that's been in the Power Ranger community for years now.
Ever.
Yeah, pretty much. It was almost since day one, you could argue. But it's a point that actually came up in the comments section of the last video that I did here at the Tavern. So for those of you who have not seen it, I did a video that responded to Linkara's History of Power Rangers, Jungle Fury. And I pretty much, Raptor, you've seen the video, I pretty much talked about how I did not particularly enjoy Jungle Fury after had seen Genki Ranger at the time. And that led to this comment by one of the Tavern fans, Nightwing45304, and I will read you his comment. Have you ever stopped to consider that Power Rangers should stand on its own and not be compared to Sentai? And he goes on from there, but that's the gist of his argument. And Raptor, I think this is a conversation worth having, given the unique construction and origins of Power Rangers and where we are today with mass communication and media, basically, and the accessibility of these shows.
Yeah, if you know Japanese, you can watch it. You can watch Sentai as it airs, because you can get a web feed of their actual broadcast.
And, of course, naturally, nowadays, with the buyout Saban had from Disney, and us essentially being 2-3 years behind in some cases, we have the ability to be exposed to Sentai before Power Rangers. And, you know, Raptor, just kind of give me your general thoughts on Nightwing's comment, you know. When he says it should stand so not be compared to Sentai, what's your gut reaction from that?
All right, well, okay, I'm going to share a recent experience here. In your video, you cite seeing Genki Ranger first as something that detracted from your enjoyment of Jungle Fury.
Yep.
And something similar happened to me. I had watched bits and pieces of Dino Thunder. I saw History of Power Rangers. I'm familiar with it. And I thought, yeah, it's an alright show. Probably one of Rangers better. Then I watched Aba Ranger as subbed by Imagination Station. And holy crap, did that make my opinions on Dino Thunder drop. It's like just seeing how great of a show it was. Maybe I couldn't put it as the best Sentai ever, but it definitely has some of Super Sentai's best characters. Namely, Abari Killer.
Yeah. Now, of course, you and I have seen a lot of Sentai. Now, I just finished Dai Ranger a couple weeks ago, and I've seen everything Genki Ranger up to Tokyuger now. Besides Aba Ranger, what Sentai series have you seen in its entirety?
The only other ones I've seen in entirety are Go Kaiju and Jetman. Okay. But I've seen bits and pieces of a lot of them.
Okay, but sufficient to say, I mean, we've seen the show, so I would say for a lot of these seasons we have a fair compare and contrast between the two. And you know, here's what it comes down to, Raptor, I think, and this is why I think it's important to really talk about this topic, is that when I talked about Genki Ranger compared to Jungle Fury, the way I looked at it is that Genki Ranger did it right. Everything was good about it. I didn't really have any major problems with it. But when Power Rangers came in and adapted into Jungle Fury, they took a lot of the interesting elements out of it and distilled it down. And maybe they changed it for the better or for the worse, but I'm of the opinion that if you have the opportunity to watch the Sentai first, and after my interview with Kevin Rubio, he indicated to me that they have the ability to watch it. I don't think they're required. I don't think he said that, but they have the episodes widely available to them. That I think you need to make an effort as a writer, creator, producer, whatever, to make your product better than its original source. What do you think of that, Raptor?
Well, just a quick note though, in your Rubio interview, he did say that when you're assigned to write a specific episode, you had to watch that episode of Sentai pretty closely, just because of the whole time code thing he talked about.
Absolutely. So again, but I think that if you watch it, you other than the time codes, you follow the story. I would assume you have to, because you're not watching it just for the action. And I'm hoping that they have subbed versions of some kind.
I thought either that or they have scripts.
Yeah, I think they had scripts too.
That would be very, very, very dumb sending them in blind.
Yes, but again, to my point, do you agree with the statement that if you're adapting it, you should find ways to make it better than the original?
Yeah, I do agree with your statement. You've made that statement before, and I agree with it. Because even in the Sentai I love, there are flaws. And if you're truly committed to improving a story, then you can identify those flaws.
Now I want to bring up... Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Or if you're being lazy, you can just let those things fly under the radar, let them get worse, or just go ahead and make all new problems.
Now, I want to go ahead and bring this up because, I gave a little bit of thought of it, and maybe this is something that needs to go into a little bit more detail here in the future. But when I look at it, I think you can sum up the adaptation from Sentai to Power Rangers in 3 different forms. And these aren't formal names, they're just kind of ideas that I had. One way you can adapt Power Rangers is a straight adaptation. Or Google Translate the Japanese scripts into English. And that's exactly what they did with Samurai. Because after, they took the Shinkenger scripts and basically wrote out Japanese people with white people and kanji and historical relevance to nothing.
Power symbols.
Exactly. So that's one way of adapting Power Rangers.
And it's also worth noting that SPD and Wild Force received this accusation as well, just not to the same extent as Samurai.
Absolutely. So there are seasons that do that. Then there are seasons that go completely opposite of the source material. Good examples of this would be the Mighty Morphin seasons, and even Lost Galaxy, where they are so completely distant from their sources. I mean, Ginga Man was based on nature in the forest, and of course then you adapt into a show called Lost Galaxy. Something just doesn't add up there, of course.
Well, come on, you mentioned the other one that I know you don't want to mention.
And RPM, of course.
Okay, continue.
Yeah, so, but there is that direction to go. And then, of course, there is what I'm going to refer to as the fusion, where you do take the Japanese stories, but you come up with something a little bit different. And I think Jungle Fury does fit into this category, because Jungle Fury does keep a lot of the elements of, even the villain's base, the Jungle Masters, and things like that. A lot of the elements are the same, but they make it different enough that it is a fresh approach. And I honestly think that 9 times out of 10, that's probably the better way to do it. Because I think... Oh, go ahead.
I was say it's the approach that most Ranger series have taken. Wouldn't you say that most Power Ranger seasons do that approach?
I would say so. Because again, let's go back to Jungle Fury, since that's the most recent in my mind. Because it's like, so we got the character of Daishi. I mean, if we take a look at his Japanese version of Ryo, it is a little bit of the Japanese version, comes with the costume. His storyline is somewhat similar, albeit superficially, but then they add in new elements like the human host, the dragon spirit, and things like that. So again, it's a mismatch. But when we talk about a fusion series like that, I bring up the fact again with the Ryo Daishi character is that what they did so well in Sentai that they either had to copy the exact same thing or come up with something different. But in this particular case, I think they came up with something different that just wasn't as good as the original. Whether they could have actually done the long storyline or not is up for debate, but that's where we run into, I think, a lot of the problems here.
Another great example of such a character is Rita Repulsa.
Yeah, because
she is incredibly different from the Witch Bandora, but she excels in her own ways.
Absolutely, and that, of course, I think is attributed more to giving her an American actress by the time we get to Season 2, because that's when the personality really kind of shifts from the Wicked Witch of the West dub up into a, I wouldn't say more fleshed out character, but somebody who's a little bit more defined and has separated herself from the Japanese source.
Okay, fair enough. But let's continue on with Jungle Fury and Daishi.
Well, actually, yeah, I kind of want to go back to our main topic because I don't want this to be a retread of what I talked about Jungle Fury. But the original point here is comparing Power Rangers to Super Sentai, and here's where I think is the issue that comes up, is that you could watch Power Rangers back in the day without watching the Japanese series at all, and you could be entertained with it. As soon as you were able to watch the Japanese version and compare them, I think that's where we kind of run into this issue. And the uniqueness of Power Rangers makes it different than, say, your typical anime. Because let me ask you this, Raptor, you're far more versed in anime than I am.
Yes.
Most of the time, anime, and correct me if I'm wrong, is a translation. They dub it into English, but it's pretty much the same story, same characters.
In modern anime, back in the 80s, they had some really weird stuff that was very comparable to Power Rangers. You would have series. One great example is Robotech, which fused 3 different anime series from Japan.
Sort of like what VR Troopers did when they started.
Yes,
out.
Exactly. Or the Beetleborgs.
Okay. But to the point I'm making is like, so when you go to anime, let's just use this as an example. First of all, there is dubbed and subbed. In Power Rangers, there is no sub, there is no dub. There is Power Rangers and there is Super Sentai. So there is a distinction between the two, which is again is where we run into this problem. And in anime, with the exception, I think, of some Pokemon episodes where they actually contacted the Japanese animation studio, they don't really draw new scenes or new animation in to make a storyline different. I mean, is that about accurate?
I would say in modern anime. Now, there's a lot of censoring, but yes, for the point you're making, yes, it's translation. It is rewriting the script in English and making changes where necessary.
And again, that's mainly for censorship. But when you compare Power Rangers and Super Sentai, again, in my opinion here, is that you have 2 different shows, but one came first. And now that we have the ability to actually view that before there's a Power Ranger adaptation, I think there are certain expectations that come from that. Would you agree?
Yes, and refresh my memory. You said that Genki Ranger was your first Sentai, right?
That was the first Sentai I watched in its entirety. Watched every single episode.
When did you become aware of Sentai and start trying it out?
Well, I first became aware of Sentai probably at the end of high school. Well, no, actually, because I remember SPD or Dika Ranger promotional material when they were in pre-production, basically, before, I'm trying to remember the year. So this had to be like 2002, around that time, if I'm getting my years right. So I knew that there was Super Sentai, but I was not fully aware of the shows and the stories and the differences until YouTube came around and started having episodes that were subbed up online.
And from what I read on TV tropes about the Power Rangers fandom, Sentai subs really exploded in that lull between RPM's ending and Samurai's airing a year later. Because there was no new Rangers season, and so people looked to Japan for Sentai, and they got to see Shinkanger. And Shinkanger's a great gateway series.
Yeah, I mean, Shinkanger is insanely popular in Japan. Not sure why. I mean, when I was there, I still saw Shinkanger stuff on sale in the market. So, but yeah, I mean, I think to the point I'm trying to go ahead and make here, and I know we can't kind of go all over the place, and that's just the nature of how this works. But the idea is that now that you can view it, it's hard not to compare it nowadays. Because now we have Dino Charge coming up. And first of all, I think there are so many high expectations for that season as it is. But we've already got a chance to watch Kyoryuger in its entirety. We know the plots. We know what worked, what was good. And now I think it's inevitable that those who have seen it are going to compare Dino Charge to Kyoryuger. And based on some of the things that we've seen, it's like you almost have to compare it in some ways.
Think about it. You sit there and you're watching the episode, the fight scenes come up, all of a sudden you're seeing scenes that you distinctly remember from the Sentai.
And it's not even about seeing the scenes, but it's even about the plot lines. I don't know if you got a chance to read any of the character bios, but from the Red Ranger, the Pink Ranger distinctly, in references to the Red Ranger about his missing father, and about the Pink Ranger, her possible crush on the Red Ranger.
Also, there's the whole thing about the Red Ranger being very outgoing, being very friendly, just like Daigo, and also Amy being fiercely independent is reflected in, what's her name, Shelby?
Shelby, I believe, yes.
Yeah.
So basically what that tells me from there is that we've had this footage, we've already seen it, and they're shaping the characters based on something that already came before. So by the time that it's said and done, we can actually compare these characters. I think by the end of Dino Charge and Dino Supercharge, or whatever it's going to be called, is you can take Amy and Shelby and compare them. That it will be like apples to apples. I mean, a lot of people believe it's apples to oranges, but I don't necessarily believe that in a lot of these cases. I mean, even when we take, say, Summer and Saki from Go Kaiju, I mean, that is apples to oranges. They are two completely different characters, and those characters should stand on their own. But I think the series as a whole is comparable because of what choices you made based on what came before.
And face it, when even if you reshot almost everything, there's going to be comparison at the end of the day, because you're still using the same suits and the same mecha and the same weapons as the Japanese series.
And consider this too. Several people have pointed out on other forums and other places that Power Rangers in essence is almost like a reboot of the series. So if a reboot of Sentai. So if we take in that route, Raptor, you and I both saw the same movie this past year. We both saw the Godzilla movie.
Yeah.
Now, the thing is, you came into it as a Godzilla fan, and you didn't like it.
The first time.
Okay. But I came in as not really a Godzilla fan. I mean, I know of the character and stuff, but I enjoyed it. But I can understand your point of view comparing it to the franchise as a whole, because this came first, and they're adapting it into something different. Granted, they're not using footage, but they're taking the mythos and the characters.
Yeah, that's spot on.
Yeah, and I think Power Rangers is similar to that. I mean, the thing is, again, with the availability, I mean, I think what it is that a lot of people are under the assumption that kids, and let's go in that direction, that children are not going to see the Japanese version, therefore they can do wherever they want, and it doesn't really matter. But I think that's coming from the idea of that children are not going to be interested in looking for this kind of stuff. I mean, some children are nowadays and stuff, but you got a 10-year-old who's in the Power Rangers and stuff. You don't think at some point he's going to run across that stuff on the internet, run across on YouTube and find the subs and all that kind of stuff. With information out there, the comparison's going to go ahead and happen.
I would assume with the Neo Saban era that they count on the fleeting demographic rule that with their show aimed at 4 to 8-year-olds, they will quickly grow out of Power Rangers and never think to look at look it up on the internet.
Yeah, but that violates like the first rule of your audience, talking down to your audience or assuming that your audience is dumber than they are. I mean, we learned that you don't take your audience for granted. You don't assume your audience is going to be dumb. You have to assume that you have an intelligent audience, that they're going to look for plot holes, they're going to look for these mistakes and stuff like that. And I don't care the demographic. You don't talk down to a 4-year-old if that's your audience,
Well, actually, here's a great example of that. Friend of mine, she works as a nanny. She told me that one of the boys she watched was forcing her to watch Power Rangers Megaforce, Super Megaforce. And he would constantly point out continuity mistakes. Not like Power Rangers continuity mistakes, just continuity mistakes in the filmmaking. And so this kid in the target demographic was noticing these issues. So take that for what you will.
Well, I mean, I just think that Saban in general, and I'm going to say this of Disney as well, that they underestimate the intelligence of their audience. And I don't think that they realize... Like, I think I told you this story. So I went to L.A. in May, and I got to meet the production staff for My Little Pony. And, we got into the discussion about bronies and everything. And it was an interesting discussion, especially for the people in our group that didn't know what a brony was. But
yeah, I really don't like that the professor uses me as an example. I was only a brony because I was dating a girl that was a brony, and then I never was again. But anyways, continue.
Okay. Well, the point from that conversation was that we talked about bronies, and the woman basically said, at the end of the day, we appreciate their input, but it's a show for 4-year-old girls. And, I don't work in the business, but I think you need to be able to have a good balance of your market. And with Power Rangers, I mean, it's not like we have, 30-year-old women who are really big into it and they have their own demographic thing like the bronies, but you do have people who are in their 20s, about to hit their 30s, that still love the show.
Who hopped on board when they were in the intended demographic, so it's not as...
Exactly. And I think Saban now needs to realize those kids we got when it came out in 93, they're still fans of the show. So these fans are growing up are going to be fans of the show as well, and they're going to expect better of us. And I think that's what our people of our age, we expect better of Power Rangers, which I think goes back to this whole conversation of comparing it to the Sentai, because I'm going to say, I other than, okay, in all the Sentai, I haven't seen a horribly bad Sentai. Ghost Ranger just wasn't good, but I'm not going to go ahead and say it was bad.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I would have to say the same thing. I've looked at, I've tried to find people's opinions on the worst Sentai, and the Sentai that get ranked at the bottom, none of them seem to have the hatred that say Operation Overdrive catches in the Power Rangers fandom.
Or Turbo. Actually, and Turbo's kind of come around as being not as bad as people remember it, which is an interesting turn of events. But also, to that, when I've asked...
for that.
Probably. Not to mention, there are worse actors than Justin. But also, a lot of those statements are, prefaced by, I guess it's... because, I never see a quick reaction I hate this. And the weird thing is, I always see Zoo Ranger on that list. And the explanation is because Japanese didn't like the use of all those kids. I was like, all right, well, that's the Japanese, but what about you guys? Which is kind of weird.
Yeah, kind of just recycling the opinions they were told to have.
Yeah, but again, when we talk about comparison, I really think it's an apples to apples kind of thing, just because of the way that the show is being made, the following, and the outside stuff.
Actually, here's the comparison I'm going to make.
Okay.
It is comparing apple cider to apple pie.
Okay.
Both unique things in their own right. However, they share a common ingredient. That being they're both derived from apples. And so in Power Rangers, I would say that the apple in this case is the suits, the general skeletons of plot lines, and because I don't think it's quite apples and oranges. If we want to say apples and oranges, I think that would be comparing Power Rangers and Beetleborgs.
Absolutely, because those are, in essence, two different types of shows. I mean, Male Hero and Sentai are just as different as, Power Rangers and Beetleborgs. Raptor, how much Shinkanger have you seen?
The only Shinkanger I've seen was the episode you showed me that he ain't heavy metal, he's my brother is based on.
Yeah, the one the Rubio worked on. Obviously you're aware of the criticism, and I've told you a couple of things. And here's the thing about Samurai, where, a lot of people will also say you can't compare Shinkanger to Samurai, even though it's pretty much the exact same thing. But the reason that a lot of people look at Samurai as being worse than Shinkanger is not because of the acting. It's not because they shoehorned Bulk in there. It's that they took what made Shinkanger unique was its samurai aspect and completely distilled it as a bunch of fanboys that are caught on the superficial aspects of samurai but have no idea that samurai means he who serves.
So basically, they're all Shinken brown.
In a way, exactly. And I think that's where in situations like that, comparing them is completely justified, because the writers have taken the exact same story, even to where they are crediting the Japanese writers of the original episode.
When they make no attempt to differentiate, that's when the comparison is completely valid.
Now, would you say, let's take a look at another series, Ginga Man and Lost Galaxy. Now, in Lost Galaxy's favor, that worked out for them. It really did, deviating completely from the story. But I do think in some way you can compare Ginga Man to Lost Galaxy. And in the sense that this is what Ginga Man did, this is what Lost Galaxy did, and you can really say this was better here, this was better there. But in the situation like Samurai and Shinkanger, it's just kind of like they're almost equal in an exact way, except for one missing element. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yes, I do. And you make a good point in that when it comes to comparing Lost Galaxy to Ginga Man, you end up with favorable comparisons.
Yeah, and then I'm going to go ahead and talk about the series that I talk about a lot in the show, and that's RPM and Go Kaiju. And where the comparison has a problem there is that you go too far from the source material without really justifying the changes. So when you compare them, it's kind of like RPM's trying to be serious, whereas Go Kaiju's trying to be humorous, and they just don't really mesh too well. You get what I'm saying?
In your opinion.
Well, yes, that is my opinion there. But okay, let's take Super Mega Force and Go Kaiju, which of course Super Mega Force. A lot of people are saying that's like the worst Power Rangers series ever, worse than Operation Overdrive. Now I haven't actually seen all the episodes yet. I got to get up on that, but I'm seeing what their point is, because to compare Go Kaiju and Power Rangers Super Mega Force, you have to say, I mean, I don't even think this is opinion, I think this is almost fact, is that Go Kaiju is superior to Super Mega Force because there is significance in what they are doing, but there's no significance in what's going on with Super Mega Force. Am I making myself clear on that one?
Oh, yeah, that is. And I think we can return to the samurai comparison there, in that they don't do much to differentiate themselves. And while samurai at least attempted to copy some of the more complex elements of Shinkenger to varying degrees of success, Super Megaforce blatantly copies a lot of things from Go Kaiju, but also strips out a lot of layers and complexity, and so you're left with something that's copying a basic shell of Go Kaiju's plot with a semi-original connection to Go Sager thrown in.
And that's why I say that when you compare them, you have to do it from the perspective of, you had chance to make it better. Why didn't you make it better? So when we take a look at, Kevin, for example, here. I would argue Joe is far superior than the character of Kevin. Because Joe, they gave him personality, they gave him a tragic backstory.
No, you're thinking, you're talking, Kevin's the Blue Samurai Ranger.
Oh, Noah, my apologies. Okay, but...
Holy crap, I caught the barkeep on a Power Rangers detail.
Well, is there really any difference between Noah and Kevin? Seriously?
All right, fair point. But anyways, let's continue.
Okay, so, but Joe was given a tragic backstory, he was given character, and he was given unique traits, such as his sword fighting abilities. That was like his big thing, the fact that he was in the military, have all that stuff. Now, when you go to write the character of Noah, granted they are based off the Go Sager footage and the Go Kaiju footage, don't you take the opportunity to say, this character was great, let's see what worked about him, and try to make this character of Noah better. Now, you can say, yeah, we're going to make him different, but you have to kind of improve about it. Like, this worked here, but we need to make something that works, if not work better. Do you see what I'm saying? When you approach it from a production and writing standpoint, you don't want to make the character worse. You got to make him better than the original and justify some things. Because, again, with Noah, the thing about Noah, he's a scientist, he's the smart one. But nowhere does his Go Sager or Go Kaiju counterpart actually exhibit intelligence of the Billy variety. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and then that skill is mysteriously transferred to the jock muscle of the group.
Exactly. So that's what I'm talking about there is the comparisons. You got Joe, you got Noah, and one's obviously better than the other, and Power Rangers had the opportunity to make him better. And yes, you can say, again, that you can make him different, but it needs to be different and better because you had the opportunity to see what worked, see what didn't work, and go forward from there. And I've never heard anybody say that Joe was a bad character.
I really haven't heard anyone say that any of the main Go Kaijers were bad characters. But anyways, let's talk about maybe not one where the Power Rangers character was better, but where the Power Rangers character is equally respected.
Okay.
Burai versus Tommy.
Okay, all right.
Tommy is incredibly different from Burai. Their backstories are completely different, even though they both involve serving. Both involve serving someone played by Machiko Soga.
But one is under a spell, and the other is, fueled by revenge.
Mm-hmm. And then but then once Tommy got out from under the spell, he went in a drastically different direction than Burai. But you don't see people negative. You get some, but you don't see a lot of people negatively comparing Tommy to Burai.
And I think in a lot of ways it's because Tommy had the ability to grow as a character and became he so much separated himself as the problem with a lot of the Power Ranger seasons after In Space, I would say, is the Rangers are associated with their one costume, but not associated as a character. Tommy is not associated as the Green Ranger, White Ranger, Black Dino Thunder. He's just Tommy. Mm-hmm. Which is just something happens naturally with those first 6 seasons. But in the comparison, I think it's fair to compare those two characters because you had this guy, and for the show you were crafting, you had to do something different. But in a lot of ways, what they were doing was better because the spell and his regret over that.
Yeah, and so that is a favorable comparison in that you can compare Sentai to Power Rangers and say they did some things better. And so in that case, it's a fair comparison. But all right, so here's a question.
Yeah.
Are there any series where you don't think the comparison is fair?
I was going to bring this up because there was another video, and I'm not even going to provide the link or say who it is. One, because I don't remember, don't bother looking them up. And two, I really just didn't like the video. I just kind of watched it out of boredom. But somebody was making the comparison between Mac and the Boken Red character, whose name I can't recall.
I remember you telling me about this. Continue.
Yeah. Now, he pointed out one of the reasons he did not like Operation Overdrive, almost said RPM there, does not like Operation Overdrive, is because of the character of Mac. But I think he made an unfair comparison to Boken Red. And his whole basis for not liking Mac is because Mac was an android. And his line was, Boken Red did not need to be an android to be the greatest leader in Sentai history. Something along those lines. And the thing is that you can't say Mac is a bad character just because he's an android, and you can't say that Boken Red is a good character because he's not an android. And I think that's where we're having these problems, is because those people are making those type of comparisons, saying that this character's bad because he's an android, this character is not bad because whatever. You see what I'm saying with that?
Yes, exactly. And so that's a case where they did something different, but it's just hard to compare because they're both good and bad in their own ways. And it's not a polar comparison. When I say a polar comparison, I mean, go back to Joe versus Noah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, well, I mean, I just think that there are people who are trying to make those comparisons where it is unfair, and I think because of those types of unfair comparisons, that's where we get this big debate where Power Rangers should not be compared to Sentai. And I do agree with what a lot of people say. Lankara has said this, Nostalgia Critic has said this, SF Debris has said this, is that a work of fiction or work of art, whatever, needs to be able to stand on its own.
Yes, and I was about to try and lead this discussion into that because I think that's the core answer to this question.
And that's true, but what it comes down to me, this is what I look at, is that you have that Andy Warhol painting of the soup can, okay? And Andy Warhol, he's an interesting artist for whatever you want to go ahead and say about him. But if somebody came nowadays and drew the exact same thing, but in their style, people are going to compare it to Andy Warhol because that artist would likely have taken that exact painting of the soup can and painted it in his own style with direct inspiration from Andy Warhol. So you cannot have that artist's work stand on its own because of the significance and impact of what Andy Warhol did. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
And I think
the comparison is inevitable.
Absolutely. And I think because of where Power Rangers is nowadays, you have to make those comparisons. If this was still in the age where there was no internet, we had no idea it was based off a Japanese television series, and that's all we had to see, then, I mean, yeah, you can't really make comparisons at that time because you didn't have the information. But now that you have the information, it's readily available, and with Zoo Ranger coming out on DVD and hopefully more Sentai to follow at that point, the comparison...
Want to.
Yeah, I know your issues on that, but it's going to go ahead and happen. And I think what Saban's going to have to look at is they know that people of our demographic and even their target demographic are going to be comparing that, and they're going to have to step up their game, which I think is a good thing for the industry because that's what's going to boil down to. They're going to realize that their fans are not interested in the show because they have found Sentai and find it superior. And that's a simplistic way of putting it, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, they need a good competitor. Have someone license another Toei show. Get Kamen Rider Game into an American series.
Well, I think Dragon Knight, that was the only other competitor, and that failed after, 16 episodes or something?
Yeah, but it won an Emmy for sound editing, so it did something right.
True. Raptor, I think this conversation, it's so broad, and we keep kind of coming back to the same
It's
points.
incredibly situational, too.
Absolutely, but I'm going to go ahead and make last call here, and I want your final verdict, your final word, final opinion. What is it you want to leave the patrons here with the comparison between, Super Sentai and Power Rangers? Just what are your general final say on that?
The comparison is inevitable, so I have to get that out of the way. However, at the end of the day, one should, if one wants to be a fan of Rangers and a fan of Sentai, they should try to give each show the opportunity to stand on its own and try to not be comparing it to its counterpart. Because if it can stand on its own, then that should be all you need. Now, if it doesn't stand on its own, then you can start getting into comparisons. But if it stands on its own, that should be enough. That's what I have to say.
And I think the thing, I've said an awful lot here, but I think the thing I want to kind of leave for everybody, and particularly for Nightwing, because he brought this whole thing up, which is why we want to go ahead and talk about it tonight, just bring up the fact that I think in the way our culture is, and by the nature of Sentai and Power Rangers, it's going to be compared. There's no way of stopping it. And people are just going to be disappointed with one or the other, whether you see it first, whether you see it second, just because that's what's going to go ahead and happen. So it's completely fair to compare them, let them stand on their own, or whatever. It's all your opinion, and I'm not going to say anybody's opinion is wrong here, because I've certainly been told my opinion is wrong a number of times, but I'm not going to do that to everybody else. But I just hope this comparison leads us to a good place, that I don't want us to see Sentai-only fans, Power Ranger-only fans, that I think because of the nature of the franchises, it's almost... you have to kind of be one and the same nowadays.
Well, no, I think the recent seasons of Power Rangers have been creating a faction of Sentai purists amongst the American fans.
And that ultimately comes with the fumbling of the series, the mishandling of certain elements, and all that. And I think Neo Saban is a discussion for another day, but I think we've talked enough. I think we've made our point, probably not as eloquently as we had hoped, but I think...
do we ever?
Yes, but that's the fun. Is like, Raptor, I could talk about Power Rangers for 3 hours with you, and I have with you before, but I think this is a little too much for our audience, so... Raptor, I want to thank you again for joining, even with our busy schedules.
Good to be back.
Absolutely. And, patrons, tell us what you think. Tell us your experiences with comparison, whether they're fair comparisons, unfair comparisons, whatever. Leave those in the comments section. We look forward to reading them. But from Raptor and me, we want to thank you for listening to the Tavern. Have a good evening. And the Tavern is now closed.